Locked between the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Apuan Alps at the northern end of Tuscany, Versilia is a perfect combination of nature and culture. The landscape is varied with picturesque views of hills and mountains, the lakes of Massachucoli and rich Mediterranean scrub along the coastline. Romantic churches, medieval villages, castles, forts and numerous archaeological sites attest to the long history of the region, which has been inhabited since the Neolithic. The region was named after the Ruosina Canal, which was mapped on the Tabula Peutingeriana and known in Roman times as the Visilia River. Versilia is small, more or less 350 square kilometers, and is mostly known for its beaches, but just behind the sandy dunes it conceals a lot more. We will try to show you as much of its marvels as we possibly can in the time we have. It will be your pleasure to go and discover what we can't show you. This is where it all started, underneath Mount Penna near Metato, where the first men sheltered their culture from the elements and the passing of time. Neanderthal man had abandoned the region long before our ancestors settled here underneath these inaccessible rocks. Later, the Etruscans, arriving from the sea, saw more or less what we see today. Broad beaches protecting with their sand dunes luxuriant Mediterranean scrub. And just a little further, hills covered in silver-green olive trees which are now dotted with red rooftops, villages hanging on the slopes and bell towers. Behind them, the peaks of the Apuan Alps are streaked with the green of woods and meadows and sprayed with the white treasure they conceal within, marble. Above all this, the blue sky merging with the sea behind the viewer. Let's disembark like the Etruscans and journey through what we have seen from afar. First, we come across a Romanic church known as Pieve a Elici, dedicated to San Pantaleone. A small but great example of architecture and art, immersed in the peace of the olive groves, set apart from other buildings, guarding the very plain and sea it dominates from its position. The church is very old. The first building on the site dates back to the 6th century, and at its peak it ruled over an extensive area from Massachucoli to Camaiore and Massa Rosa. A few miles away we find another small gem of sacred architecture, the church of San Michele ad Orbiciano, where maybe one Buonagiunta Orbiciani mentioned by Dante in the Purgatory stopped to pray. The church was probably originally built in the 11th or 12th century. Another church, Santa Maria Albiano, different and similar at the same time. Similar in that it is a religious building too, but its position close to the castle ensured it played a different role in history as well as in the landscape. the small village of Fibbiano showing its Roman origins in its name. It was once a farm, most probably given to a retiring legionnaire named Fibulus, who ended his days here cultivating the soil with his family. The village developed around the original house in a completely different way from the many others we find on the hills and in the valleys of Versilia. A little further up, the background is still the same. On one side the sea, on the other the mountains. The vegetation changes and the woods become thicker. We have left the olive groves a little further down. Another small church awaits us, the church of San Jacopo. These are the remains of an ancient hospice. Its existence was first recorded in writing in the 9th century. A kind of place once known as a hospital. This is where peregrines travelling the way of St. Francis could find food and shelter. After travelling through valleys and plains, a peregrine could find refuge at the Passo del Lucchese since the 8th century. Next we come to Gombitelli, a place which was a linguistical island until, thanks to television and uniformation, it was assimilated. Its inhabitants spoke a weird dialect studied by many glotologists trying to trace its origins as well as that of its inhabitants. Gombitelli was also famous for its smiths, who forged nails and agricultural implements for the surrounding valleys. Descending, we come across the Monte Magno Holly, guarding the valley of Camaiore and the ruins of its castle, which he might have seen whole in its youth. We won't only see churches on our way, but there are still a few, and the next one is well worth a visit. We're at the Pieve of San Stefano and San Giovanni near Camaiore. Look at it. Apparently, it goes back to the time of the Longobard occupation between the 6th and the 8th century. The building we see today has been through various restorations at different times, which have preserved the original architectural spirit of a sacred building. Now we see the Badia of San Pietro in Camaiore, remains of the ancient abbey that dominated Versilia in competition with the lords of Montemagno, Corvaia and Vallecchia. The abbey was built by the Benedictine order around the 7th or 8th century and has been very important in the history of Versilia. It wasn't only politically active, but also instrumental in draining and reclaiming the surrounding territory. An important part of the drainage work in the plain of Camaiore was carried out by the monks, and the local river, which once formed a swamp exiting the valley, now flows all the way to Lido and is named in their honour Abbey Trench. The olive groves, which today still make the hills surrounding the valley very pleasant, were also started by the monks. That is the ancient history of Versilia. Let's see what has been preserved in today's folklore and tradition in the summer fairs held every year in Camaiore. Let's see one with its costumes, its games, merchants, citizens and tourists. The water of Versilia is by default the salty water of the sea. But that isn't all. Singing streams flow through luxuriant woods along valleys of such intense green that they seem fake so close to the sea. In the ironworks of Candela, the mallet is still powered by the torrent today, and ruins of ancient workshops are found along the river. Greenery, shady glades and the gentle murmuring of a stream bring to those hiking here a sense of peace and serenity, hard to imagine just a few miles away. We will find more waters, all in due time. Given the landscape surrounding us, our journey will have to go uphill and downhill. So let's walk up the mountains embracing the valley of Camaiore. Olive groves surround us in all directions, communicating the sense of peace for which this ancient Mediterranean tree is a symbol. In the Bible, a dove brought an olive branch to Noah, symbolizing peace between God and mankind. We shouldn't forget this. Here is Monteggieri, a symbol of war readapted to peace. Once a fortress, it is now a residence for artists looking for inspiration in the bucolic peace of a village without cars. A little further down, in clear view, the castle of Rotaio, a typical building for the area, almost classic, now converted into a peaceful abode. Seravezza is the gateway to the Appian Alps. From here we ascend following two torrents that give the town its name, entering thick woods on the steep mountainside, today a regional park. The Appian Alps well deserve their denomination. It would be just like being on the Alps if it weren't for the sea, well visible on the background of amazing mountain views. How can anyone resist the charm of Monteforato? But it isn't just the steep slopes or the strange atmosphere of the Procinto that marvel visitors. Inside the Appian Alps, within the bowels of the mountains, nature has sculpted fantastic and amazing landscapes. A subterranean world full of marvels, like the Antro del Corchia, which you are seeing now. Today, a balanced intervention by man has made these marvels available to everyone. An easy, agile track has been built and takes you where once only expert speleologists could go. It snakes its way inside the mountain for 2 kilometers. The complex of the Antro del Corchia is a lot longer, around 80 kilometers, and still growing as exploration continues to this day. It's a fine example of karsism, a phenomenon typical of the Appian Alps, which are full of caves, some of which are extensive in size and charm. Most of the complex is only accessible to speleologists and cannot be visited by the average tourist because there are no facilities like this allowing everyone to see what nature can do over hundreds of thousands of years. Our tour is over. We were able to show you just a few of the things we wanted to. Many others you may discover for yourselves when you'll be tired of basking in the sun. You may use any means of transport from bicycles to horses and scooters. The best way is on foot. If you leave the sea behind you or you coast it, you'll see how much there still is to be seen.